Thank you very much for coming. Most of you, I see, are familiar faces to me and to the rest of us at the Aspen Institute, so welcome to you, and a very warm welcome to newcomers as well. I won't call out individual names with one exception. We're joined by the Gildenhorns, Ambassador and Mrs. Alma Gildenhorn. We're in the Gildenhorn room of the Aspen Institute here in Washington, D.C., and we're very grateful to you for being here and for your support of the Institute. I am Clark Irvin. I'm the Executive Director of the Aspen Institute's Homeland Security Program, and I'm also the Executive Director of the Aspen Security Forum. And we are here today for the first ever preview event for the Aspen Security Forum. The forum has proved to be, I'm pleased to say, so popular and the discussion so vital over the last 6 years that we are now in the process of taking the forum on the road, and we're starting first, appropriately, here at our home base in Washington, D.C. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the forum, it brings to our campus in Aspen Meadows in Colorado each summer, the topmost present and former government officials from all the key agencies in the United States government, the National Security Council at the White House, the Departments of Homeland Security, Defense, State, Justice, and Treasury, the key committees on Capitol Hill, as well as policy experts, industry leaders, foreign officials, and nationally noted print and broadcast journalists. And they discuss and debate the major issues of the day in the field of Homeland Security and national security generally. We hope that those of you who have not yet signed up will join us in Aspen this summer. The dates are July 22nd to 25th. And I'll just note some of our confirmed speakers to date. Homeland Security Secretary Jay Johnson, the Director of National Intelligence General Clapper, the FBI Director, the Secretary of the Air Force, the Marine Corps Commandant, the Director of the National Security Agency, the Special Operations Command Commander, and the present National Counterterrorism Center Director, as well as from Capitol Hill, the Chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, the Chairman of the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee, and his House counterpart. And from abroad, we will be joined by the ambassadors of Britain, France, Spain, Germany, Russia, and Iraq. A special thank you to our forum sponsors, many of whom are here today: IBM, Intel Security, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, and Target, and to our media partners, the New York Times and CNN. And finally, I should mention that we're taking the forum on the road internationally as well, debuting a global version of it this coming April in London, Aspen Security Forum Global. So more to come on that, and again, thank you very much for being here. We're very pleased today to start our conversation with a wonderful moderator who is known to, I'm sure, all of you, namely Jennifer Griffin. Jennifer serves as the National Security Correspondent for the Fox News Channel. She joined Fox in October 1999. It's hard to believe it's been that long ago, as a Jerusalem-based correspondent. She's reported from the Pentagon for many years, as we all know, and has covered a number of major issues, including the Benghazi attack and the killing of bin Laden in 2011. Prior to joining Fox News, Jennifer covered the Mideast region for National Public Radio and U.S. News. She's a graduate of Harvard, and she's also the co-author of a book, this being the Aspen Institute. We always tout the books of our speakers and moderators: The Burning Land, Lessons from the Front Lines of the Transformed Israeli-Palestinian Conflict. With that, please join me in thanking and welcoming Jennifer Griffin from Fox News, who will introduce and be in a conversation with our first featured speaker, General Keith Alexander. Jennifer.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you all for joining us here at the 2015 Aspen Security Forum preview. I'm very grateful to be sitting next to General Keith Alexander, who really needs very little introduction. So he was director of the NSA, of course, from 2005 to 2014. And during that time, U.S. Cyber Command was stood up. I remember in 2010, May of 2010, when that was started, he was the head of Cyber Command. And before being at the NSA, he was the Deputy Chief of Staff of the Army for 2 years. He, of course, was the director of the NSA when Edward Snowden made his revelations. It's where we first learned about metadata and all sorts of other terms that are now mainstream thanks to Mr. Snowden. what you may not know about General Alexander is that last fall he was the victim of a cyber attack. In fact, he revealed that somebody had stolen his identity and taken $9,000 that was supposed to be for him from the IRS. These thieves used his stolen identity to apply for 20 credit cards. Did they not know who you were? Or who you know?
No, but they found out.
So,
bad choice.
Exactly.
Everybody
I
makes
hope
mistakes.
You've taken them out.
Well, look at the time.
So he was the first to draw the nation's attention to one of the biggest problems that we are going to face in our lifetime, and what he has described as the greatest transfer of wealth in our nation's history. More than $1 trillion, it's probably up to several trillion dollars now, of U.S. assets have been stolen by cyber criminals, cyber hackers, many of them state-sponsored cyber hackers. I remember being at the Pentagon when the DoD finally recognized and announced publicly in 2013 that China was behind some of these attacks on the Pentagon. You were the head of the NSA at that time, a very big step forward. In 2011, then Defense Secretary Leon Panetta got all of our attention when he spoke at his confirmation hearings and described the potential for a cyber Pearl Harbor. And people at the time, reporters at the time, thought that this was hyperbole, but of course Keith Alexander knows better than that. Today we're going to be discussing, in fact, the potential for a cyber Pearl Harbor, what lies ahead, how protected is our infrastructure, our nation's infrastructure. Foreign hackers have been probing everything from our nation's banks, we've seen that, and the transportation system, power grid. How safe are they? We will be talking about cyber nightmares. Is the worst yet to come? There are a few statistics I'd like to share with you. 1 million consumers a day are the victims of cybercrime. That's about 12 victims a second. Cybercrime costs the U.S. economy $100 billion annually. That's an estimate. Cybercrime is almost 1% of GDP at this point in time. Also, back in 2006, and that's a long time ago when we talk about this field, the Air Force estimated that China had downloaded 10 to 20 terabytes of data from the unclassified military network. This kind of activity is happening almost daily. We read in the news about Target, about eBay, about JP Morgan, and the cyber hackers coming from not just China, but now Russia, Iran. We really are living in very uncertain times in terms of cybersecurity. Since leaving government, I should mention that General Alexander has started his own cybersecurity firm called IronNet. It's a fascinating, state-of-the-art firm that is turning on its head the way we do cybersecurity. I'll let him explain more about it. It's very technical, but you can feel that the nation is actually going to be made safer by this technology. It's very, very interesting. So I think with that, we will start. I will start by asking you, General Alexander, have the first shots already been fired in this cyber war that Leon Panetta was predicting?
Yeah, I think the first shots, if you call them that, started actually in 2007. If you think about what happened to Estonia over the Stalin monument that was tipped over in Tallinn, May of 2007, they were hit by hackers with a massive distributed denial of service attack that disrupted their ability to communicate. They bank online, they vote online. It was a significant event for Estonia, and if you talk to President Ilves, who had been there in office about 6 or 7 months, it was a significant change. Go to 2008 in the attack, of the physical attack on Georgia. At the same time, cyber hackers, it's amazing how they actually got together, I guess, and attacked Georgia banks and government in cyber. The Buckshot Yankee stuff against the DoD networks, 2008. 2012 against the financial sector. You had Saudi Aramco with the first really big destructive attack, 30,000 systems. The data was wiped off in Saudi Aramco. A week later, RasGas, from the August to April timeframe, 2012, 2013, over 350 distributed denial of service attacks against the financial sector. March of 2013, you had South Korea hit with 2 destructive attacks. And so if you start to plot that, you'd see that the use of cyber, both for criminal activity and for nation state, has had a significant rise in the last 7, 8 years. And now if you put on the table what's going on with Iran, what's going on with Ukraine, movie makers, Anonymous, you see this only picking up. Because those people who wish our country harm, it's very difficult to take us on militarily. I know this from some of our friends in 1st Armored Division and from way back. We have a great military. Taking us on symmetrically is tough. So 2 ways, terrorism and cyber. And to reach out to us, the easiest one is cyber. And I think we're going to see that used increasingly by those who disagree with us, diplomatically, economically, militarily. And we're not yet ready for that. And that's something that we have to address.
Paint for us a picture of what a cyber Pearl Harbor could look like for the nation.
Wow, so many opportunities, so little time. And actually, you know, you could take, and you know, I point to Guy Swan, who was a G3 plans officer at 1st Armored Division when I was there. We worked together on a lot of plans. So when you think about first Desert Storm, you think about planning opportunities, you'd look at what you could do. And it seems to me that the obvious choice is go after the power grid at some point, and then sitting on the power grid, you have the financial sector, you have the healthcare sector, you have the retail sector, you have all the government, all sitting on this power grid. And so pick a sector, any sector, go after that at a certain time, and a half a second later or a second later, hit the power grid. And then the people who've been hit in this sector won't know whether it was because the power went out or did something happen to my computer. And then by the time you sort through that, if you take the Sony-like attack at the top and do that across an industry and then hit the power grid, our nation has a huge problem. And so how do you stop something like that? You know, conventional systems and our conventional approach to date has been insufficient. If all these, you know, if our approach is, you know, there's a saying, there are those companies that have been hacked and know it, and those that have been hacked and don't know it. And so what it infers is that everybody's been hacked. But if that's where we are, then I think we need to step back and say, we're not in the right place. If everybody's being hacked, and whether they know it or not, then we need a new strategy. Now, I'm not saying throw out the other stuff, but I do think we have to step back and say, this isn't working. You know, when you lose Sony, when you have Target, when you have, and some of these companies are really good, and you're spending a lot of money, and we're still getting hacked. I would step back and say, so that's what we got to fix. I do think, and we were just talking to the senator, the great senator from Missouri there, about you know, cyber legislation, FISA legislation. We need government and industry to work together in this area. You can't do it one or the other. It's got to be both. And of course, you mentioned the Snowden thing. Normally, I would never bring that up. But for these rare circumstances, it has poisoned the well in terms of having government and industry work together. And we've got to get beyond that. As a nation, we've got to take the next step. We can't afford to stop where we are, for both.
In fact, in this post-Snowden era, what is the role of government in helping prevent a Sony-like attack?
Well, I think government has a key role. Government, let's start with Sony and use that as a case. Theoretically, if Sony knew they were being attacked by North Korea and had the capability, would you want Sony to attack back? And the answer is no, because as soon as they attack back, you've had a company now entering into and engaging with a foreign government and getting us into an area where we don't want to be. And so we'd quickly say, so Sony shouldn't do that. So then whose job is it to protect Sony and other companies? And Secretary Panetta, in his speech on the Intrepid in October 2011, said, it's the Defense Department's job to defend the nation, and that includes in cyber. We have to work with DHS for Homeland stuff and FBI and others, but the Defense Department has a role. But here's the fact. The Defense Department and NSA cannot see attacks on Sony or on Wall Street. So how do we work together? And the answer is those companies have to be able to tell the government when they're being probed, when somebody's doing reconnaissance, when there's an attack. And the government, whether it's FBI for criminal or DOD for foreign nations, have to have then a suite of options that the Secretary and the President could look at. You have none of that today. So what happens is Sony gets hit. We all say, how could this happen? Fire the Sony people because they got hit. But every company could be hit, so we just go through and fire everybody. And what you come up with is, no, government and industry have to work together in this case. I think this is where the tech community actually has to step up. And so, this is, we had talked about. But from my perspective, it's a great opportunity to look at it from what I did in the military and in the intel community and say, there's more and better things we can do in cybersecurity. We ought to go do those in industry. There is a better way. We ought to put it on the table and then beat that up and make a better way. That's what our country is great at. But most importantly, if the tech community at large doesn't interface with the government and help, we suboptimize potential solutions. So the gap between the tech community and the government we've got to solve. We've got to get cyber legislation. And I think we've got to come up with cyber legislation that allows government and industry to share and provide industry the appropriate liability so that they feel free and not punished for sharing.
What do you think about the current legislation that passed on the Hill, I think in the last week or two? Is it a step in the right direction? Is it enough? Will it do? And why has it been held up? Because it was talked about for several years. What's the current state
I don't
of
think
play?
there's enough time left to go over what held it up. But I would say there might be some bipartisan politics involved. Now, I'm not a politician, so I'd have to search for that.
Don't go there.
Don't go there, yeah. So I think actually part of the problem is it's actually a difficult topic. Most of the people that are dealing with it really don't understand it. And it's not anything against them. And I've talked to great people. I had great conversations with Senators Lieberman and Collins who actually did that. These are great people who are trying to do the right thing, trying to understand a tremendously complex area. I think part of it is the politics. A lot of it is what happened out of the Snowden stuff. People are concerned, is this going to look like government surveillance? And the answer is no. There are certain things that we do today. If you have a fire, you don't say, don't tell the government we got a fire. They could send the fire department here and put it out. What were we thinking? No, you want the fire department to come and help. And if somebody is going to take down your company or trying to get into it, and it's a foreign state, then the Defense Department should be there. And if it's criminals, FBI. And we should give liability in two areas. Liability so that if the government tells them to do something, they're okay. And liability so they feel free to bring it up and not face punishment for having brought it up. I'm not sure we go far enough on that latter one. I'm just not sure. And I'd have to get expert legal opinion and other things. But I think those have to be in the bill as we go forward. I do think overall, I talked with a number of congressional members. They understand the severity of it. They know that they've got to move this forward. They know we've told them multiple times it's a crisis. And I think they are trying to get at it. And I do think the bipartisan politics of the day really hamper that.
When did you start realizing, or when did you start tracing these attacks back to governments as opposed to just hackers out there who were maybe living in China or in Russia?
A while ago. I think actually the community, it goes back to 1999. I think in the 97 and 99, the first sets of significant attacks were attributed to nation states, and then beyond, and it just kept going. Now, one of the issues, I think more correct, if I could add to that, one of the issues was you could see this was a nation state set of attacks believed to be this country, pretty good at that. And then this one was we not sure. And so attribution we weren't real good at. We knew we were getting attacked. We saw these things. So in 2005, 6, 7, there was a significant effort put on by the government to do attribution. And today, I think actually the government really is good at attribution. They got great people. It's not perfect. There's ways to obfuscate who you are, but I think overall attribution has grown significantly.
But do we have rules of engagement defined at this point to strike back? We traced the Sony attack, if you believe the government, to North Korea. Does that mean the North Korean government ordered it? And if so, are there rules of engagement in place to strike back?
So that's the issue that the current commander of Cyber Command, the Secretary, and the White House, I know, are working their way through. What are the rules of engagement? Mm-hmm. But in reality, what you want is civilian control to say when and how you use your capabilities to go back. And the President, I think, correctly has said, I reserve all the elements of power and how I will respond. And I think that's actually what you want him to do. Now, where we're not good at yet, there are things you could do in cyberspace that, because of the way it goes, that we really don't employ. Turning off an attack. Mm-hmm. I think there are things that you would say, yeah, you know, if somebody is firing at you, why don't we give you a vest, right? You say, I'm for that, especially if we're being fired at. I'd like a big vest. And if somebody's trying to break down your company and get in there, there are things the government and industry could do if we had information sharing at the right level. You know, the internet service providers could do things, the government could do things, and then the decision makers would have choice. And what you want to do is provide Cyber Command and FBI the authorities to block an attack, and the civilian leadership the controls on what are we going to do now to take an offensive step, and that should be theirs, because no matter the best intentions, something could go wrong. And then there are break glass and great things. And you know, it's great that Secretary Ash Carter's in there, because we had great conversations on just these topics. And you know, if there's one individual who really understands it, it's him. So he's in a great position for that.
Well, it was notable that one of his first visits was out to Silicon Valley last week. What was the purpose of that visit to the tech industry, and what would he like to?
I think it was golf. No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. That would be. Wasn't that the one that got everybody? No, he actually went out for a couple of reasons: to talk about cyber and to try to close the gap with industry, and that's the right thing to do. He's right. He is actually exactly right. We've got to have them work together. Mm-hmm. And you know, the tech community, you know, whether it's the metadata law, you know, let's put that on the table. Who better to help come up with new and original ideas on how to detect terrorists with big data than the tech community? And if we came up with a solution on that and put that out, our country could work it with Europe and others. And we could do two things. We could help solve the problem that the tech community has in Europe and solve that. Same thing in cyber. So I think what Secretary Carter did out there is the right step. We need to engage the tech community, and I think it was well received.
Are you worried about this new Freedom Act that has come before Congress, and the expiration of the Patriot Act and getting rid of 215? And
I am worried that, you know, people, we had a great, since you brought that up, let me just take on to 215, because, you know, in the middle of this, the 215 and 72, the metadata program and the collection programs, the president, I got called down to the White House. I get called down a lot, normally to answer. I felt just like high school. You're in the principal's office. Why are you here? And they brought me down to say, we're going to set up a presidential review group to look at these programs. I thought, great. We can get some luminaries. We can get Colin Powell. We can get Condoleezza Rice. We can get all these great people, and they can tell the American people how we are doing this so they understand that. And so when they moved that across the table, they said, well, we've already chosen. And I thought, whoa. And one of the people on there was a board member of the ACLU. And I said, and I'm not proud of this, but I said, you got to be shitting me. This person thinks we're the Antichrist. But they said, well, the president's already decided. So the next morning, they all come up to NSA. And about where the young lady in red sitting, he sat at about that far at the table. And I came in and I explained 215-702 and walked him through that. And I said, but more importantly, you're going to be here on and off over the next 5 weeks. Everybody from NSA who works these programs will be in 100% transparency. We'll tell you everything we're doing. So they spent 5 weeks. 5 weeks later, I come into the room to kind of get the outbrief to see how we did. you know, a little bit nervous, and he comes up around the table. I thought he's going to attack me. And actually, he came up and he goes, "You and your people have the greatest integrity of any agency." I was stunned. You know, it was like my jaw was dropped and I couldn't put it back up. And I said, "Well, don't just tell me. You need to tell the people of NSA. You need to tell the White House, and you need to tell the American people." And he said, "I'll do that." Look at this. I don't know how that got here. I thought you might ask that question. So, here's what he said in a public statement. "To say I was skeptical of the NSA is in truth an understatement. I came away from my work on the review group with a view of NSA that I found quite surprising. Not only did I find that the NSA had helped to thwart numerous terrorist plots against the United States and its allies in the years since 9/11, but I also found that it is an organization that operates with a high degree of integrity and a deep commitment to the rule of law." Signed, Jeffrey Stone, Presidential Review Group, and a board member of the ACLU, and you know he's out there at the University of Chicago. He and I have met several times. He does not agree with the current 215 program. He thinks there ought to be a couple others. But he also, in a public statement, and it's on the web, and you can see this, here's a guy. So if an Army officer and a board member of the ACLU can come together on this, I have hoped that our bipartisan politics could. And the reality is, what he said is, you know, it's like having a fire alarm. Well, we see not a lot of value in 215, and you never have a fire in your house, you'd still have a fire alarm. We still have a fire alarm in this building. It's checked. People ensure it works, but there's never been a fire. Now, 215 actually has done some, I think, some great things. My concern is if you lose that capability and we get hit with an attack, we didn't do the American people right. In fact, I would take it one step further. What Jeffrey Stone also said is he said, you know, I came in with all these great ideas on oversight and compliance, what we could and should do to this program. And you know what? Every idea I had, you were already doing. And so when you think about that, what he's come to is, yeah, I might not agree with it, but I don't have a better alternative. So I am concerned if we throw out some of these programs, now we're at risk. And why would we take risk just because we didn't get it right in the press? We're stupid, I got it in the press. But we shouldn't put American people at risk. And so I think we've got to explain that. You know, and the other part, you know, we were joking a little bit. The metadata program is metadata, to, from, numbers, date, time, group, and duration of call. There is no content. Everybody goes, you're listening to my phone calls, sir. No content. I feel like Saturday Night Live. There is no content. You're listening to my phone call. There is no content there. And so in that regard, I believe we got to get the facts out. We shouldn't sensationalize it and inflame it. We need to inform the debate.
How worried are you that Iran, countries that we sanction, that the U.S. sanctions, are going to use cyber as a way to come back at the United States? Are you seeing any evidence of it?
Well, there's been a lot of people who credit some of those attacks in the 2012-2013 to Iran. And I am concerned that if things go bad in the nuclear talks, that will be back on the table. So those are some of the things that we have to consider, and how are we going to defend our country from it? Because it's interesting that those were, in their minds, symmetric attacks against Saudi Aramco, oil industry, and the financial industry, where sanctions were put against them. And that's the way they can respond. So that's an issue, and that should be a concern for all of us. And the same thing for Eastern Ukraine.
I think what concerned me when I was looking into the list of attacks was how there are so many probing attempts into the country's infrastructure, into the water filtration systems, into the electrical power grid, and the nuclear safety, nuclear plants. And those are being traced back to nation states. So there was an amazing story this weekend on 60 Minutes about the potential for our satellites to be taken out, and how blind the country would be if China decided to take down those satellites. What concerns you most right now?
I think still the power energy is the most concerning, most damaging. And then those sectors, the financial, that sit on top of it. I'm still concerned that we'll see more symmetric. Some of those that you mentioned, going after a satellite really hard. And I think the government can do a pretty good job on defending that. I'm not confident that we have the wherewithal with today's cyber capabilities and our sharing relationships to actually defend the power in the other sectors like we should. So those are things that most concern me right now. And those are things that I think combined, the tech community can come up with a better solution and get the legislation, and we could go a long ways towards correcting that.
At this point, I'd like to open the floor up for questions for General Alexander. So if you have a question, I think there are some microphones that
We'll take answers too,
yeah.
right?
Well, and if you have any answers, of course.
Hi, General. I'm Rich Wilhelm. I, until recently, ran all the intelligence business at Booz Allen, so Ed Snowden was picking up a check for me for a couple of months. And I've done a lot of thinking about all of that in retrospect, and I want to ask you a question, because it seems to me that all of this confusion and chaos around the programs that he's talking about suffer from the lack of a trust framework. And in retrospect, do you think that the excessive secrecy about even the existence of these programs back when they were created helped contribute to the American people's reaction to all of this, particularly the privacy framework? Would we not have been better off sort of engaging a little earlier with the constituencies that you knew probably were going to raise questions about these things, and would have essentially, because I don't believe, and I don't think you believe, that really Ed Snowden had any context for what he was doing. He didn't understand any of this stuff, and that's another problem in and of itself. And that's, if you take a look at all the people who work on those programs, many of them are young and believe that the rules don't apply to them, and that they'll make up their own minds about all of this. That's certainly what he did, at least my understanding. But that's really essentially my question.
So I think you can clearly state that the lack of transparency contributed to it. The issue really comes down to, given the facts, where were the people at the time, and what was the best interest, and what did they deal with? A very tough area. And the concern, and even when this came up, I'll tell you, we had a similar issue. The concern is, what if we make a mistake and people die because we offered information that leaked classified information? One of the issues that the deputy at NSA during the height of the Snowden, Chris Inglis and I, actually had this conversation. We said, we should go out and just tell people what we're doing so they understand it. But if we mess it up and then terrorists figure out how to attack us and hundreds of people died, we did that to take the heat off our back when the country expects us to take that heat for the good of the nation. And I think that's where we need to be. Now, I do think there's more we could do on transparency. And I think that's where, in terms of writing, how we do that better, how we bring that together, I think it's in terms of what can you talk about without giving up something that the terrorists don't know. And, there was a lot of things like the New York City subway plot that was stopped because of those two programs. And if those were public, would they have known and done something different? I don't know the answer to it, but I wouldn't want to put people's lives at risk. This was an issue that started out in the 70s with the Church Pike Commission. And the way that we thought we would deal with it was, okay, so that the government's not doing something, so that NSA doesn't do something wrong, let's have the FISA court, Congress, and the administration oversee it. Both of these programs were run by the court, by Congress, and by the administration. We call them NSA programs, but let's be clear. These were our nation's programs approved by Congress, approved by the court, and overseen by the administration, and executed on their behalf by NSA. Now, we took the heat. I think the second thing, just while I'm on a roll, I think 20/20 hindsight, everybody should have stood up. Congress, the administration, and potentially the court, and said, hold it. Let me give you the facts of what we're doing and what we've approved and why we approved it right off the bat. But I think everybody at the time was concerned, what if I give up too much? And so, that's the issue. How do you know? And the answer is we don't know. And there are people trying to kill us, no matter what we say. Those, ISIS and others, still want to conduct large-scale attacks in Europe and the United States. They haven't stopped. They're not going to stop. This is a generational issue, and we need capabilities to stop them. I actually think that, interestingly, perhaps the tech community could help come up with better ways. And if we could, I'm all for a better way. In my whole time, the last 10 years, not one person has come up with a better way than 215 and 702. So my comment is, okay, I am all for a better way. Come up with a better way, let's use it. But don't say, this is really, people aren't happy with it. Well, my kids aren't happy wearing a seatbelt, but it's for their good. So how does our country now get together and get these facts out? That's the issue that I think we face.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Gweta Mazzetti. I co-chaired the Defense Science Board Energy Security Task Force with Dr. Schlesinger and Jim Woolsey and the CNO Executive Panel Energy Security, OCONUS, over there, 2 theaters. So the power grid, right, because it is the Achilles heel and everything runs on it. So I don't feel a sense of urgency, and I don't sense anything that ranks. I don't particularly care about Toys R Us running, or even Sony, but I care about defense capability, and hospitals. So and I'm not sure that cyber's one particular kind of threat. I mean, China has sold us things that have cyber takedown capability in a physical object, which is a physical attack and a cyber attack with a kill switch, which is not classified now. So what can we do to try to get the prioritization to the things that really count? Because part of the problem is no one's in charge.
Well, I think the last issue, no one's in charge. I can't address all that. But I do think in answering your question, the 2 things that have to be done. One, we've got to come up with a tech solution that makes it easier for them to defend their networks. I've talked to a number of power energy companies. They want to do better. They would do better. Give us a better solution. Help us. And 2, they're highly regulated, which means their cost margin it's huge. You know the regulation.
They're regulated for cost.
They're regulated for everything. They can't move. And so the answer is, this is where I think Congress, the administration, and others ought to step forward and say, to help them get the protection they need, let's do this.
Do you think we have the time for all of that?
I'm concerned that we're not going to do that right. So that puts a lot on the back of the Defense Department, Homeland Security, and FBI. But you know now that without some kind of sharing agreement, they're not going to see it. And so it will be too late. And that's a bad way to run a country, knowing these threats to not have solved them up front. So we've got to put that solution on the table.
I think we have time for one more. Yes.
General Alexander, I write for Wired and I write for Foreign Policy magazine. Last summer I spent 3 days with Ed Snowden in Moscow. One of the things he told me...
Could have brought him back. It would have been solid.
Didn't really want to come back. One of the things he told me in terms of why he took the documents, he pointed out General Clapper's comments where he was denying information in front of Congress that he said was untrue, that Snowden said was untrue, and a lot of other people do. But he also brought you up, and he said that you testified, I think it was Hank Johnson, when you denied that the NSA intercepts email and phone calls and text messages and so forth. Each time you were asked, you said no. And he said the only way I can show that this isn't true is by taking the documents. So first, was that information correct in light of 702 and all these other programs. And what do you have to say about his comment that that was one of the reasons he decided to take the documents?
So Hank Johnson actually asked, this was in one of the defense-related committee hearings, asked a series, in fact, use your name, but mispronounced it, if I recall. He called you Bashford instead of Bamford. And I said, are you sure it's Bashford? And he said, yes. And I said, okay, are you sure? And then he asked a question on, so this is the same guy who asked if you put too many planes on Guam, would it tip over? But I'm just saying, so taking that, so he did ask a series of questions on this, and I answered those, I think, exactly correct, and we went back over the record and ensured with our legal folks that I answered those exactly correct. With respect to FISA, what we do and how we do this, where we collect it. You know that we're authorized under 215, but that's a FISA program. So I do still stand by those statements and the way we put those, and we wrote the committee. I sat with Thornberry. I sat with all those to make sure we do it right. You bring up a good point. Since you asked the last question, though, I think you bring up a good point. You are a great author in a lot of areas. And, you know, when you look at, and you talk to guys like Snowden, and you talk to a lot of people, here's the issue that I have. In order to bring up all that you just said, he needed 2 documents. He took over 1 million. And he gave out thousands and tens of thousands on other countries that had nothing to do with these programs. But his intent, he said, was for these 2. And he went to Venezuela, or tried to get to Venezuela, via Hong Kong and Moscow. I'm not a geology or geography person, but I'd say that he took a wrong turn someplace. And so I think in all this, what I would really say, and you know, you have written some great books on that, The Puzzle Palace and other things. So here's the thing, James, what I would say is, help us get this right. You know, the country needs this capability. And, you know, I can't account for Director Clapper. He is a good person. I'll tell you, I've worked with him for a long time. Here's a guy who's done 50 years for our country. To have a guy like Snowden throw rocks at him, that's wrong. And on my statements, we went through those and ensured that exactly as they were said was correct. And I went through the lawyers, and we sent a letter to the...
But your answer was simply no. You didn't explain all these things.
No, I think it was longer than
No,
that.
I've got the transcript right here. The answers were no.
Well, it depends on which question it was, too.
Well,
And so there's a whole
those are the
series.
questions. Do you intercept, do you routinely intercept the email
In the U.S.,
communications
of U.S. persons in the U.S.
of Americans, he said?
Yeah, and I think I up front said, you mean in the United States?
No, your answer was no.
And then that's right. And so then he said yes or no. No, not in the United States, not without a FISA.
No, you didn't say that.
I did, and if you look further in the script, you'll see that.
Well, not in answer to those questions. I've got the script here, so it was just no. So I'm just explaining to you, that's what Snowden said, and if you had explained all that, that might have been different, but your answer is
I don't buy
simply
that.
no.
I really don't buy that.
Well,
You know, here's a guy who went there to take the documents. There's no other thing. He didn't go there. He didn't even know these programs existed. For him to say that is wrong. And for you to buy it, I think you ought to step back and be more objective.
I'm reading the transcript. But okay.
Do you think Russia and China were behind Edward Snowden?
There is concern that he had direction from somebody. And, you know, I'd say the best people at deception programs in the world, the Russians.
But did you
Was
have
there ever
evidence?
any evidence of that? I mean, you're making an accusation.
No, I just said the best in the world. I didn't accuse. I said they're the best in the world, and no evidence. But I am really concerned that with a person like that, when you start to look at it, you'd say, how did he, why did he do this? You know, General Wilhelm on this. When you look at it, you'd say, something doesn't look right. All I can say is, I don't know. But, you know, they are the best in the world at deception programs. And so it makes you at least wonder, and it's something that we ought to consider, is how and why did this go on? And at what point, you know, did he receive stuff like that? I think that has to be considered.
Well, General Alexander, this has been an amazing discussion. I think there'll be a continuation of it out in July in Aspen at the Security Forum. You gave us a taste for what is to come, and we thank you for your time today. We thank you for your great questions and for coming this afternoon. But with that, I think we will end. So
Yep.
thank you.
Thanks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, General Alexander, and thank you, Jennifer. We're going to be taking a quick 10-minute break, folks. If you want to take a step outside, grab some water, stretch your legs.